Just, I cannot express how, for a brief second, I thought that other thing you posted was the thing you typed right after you told me the first thing, because I clicked on the wrong channel in the Discord. I might have laughed really hard at work for a second. All right. Tuesday. All right, we're good to go. And we're already live, so I'm just going to hit record.
You got to hurry up for 45 minutes.
I'll just have to go quick on the newses. Pop, pop, pop. Okay. It's...
Is it?
Just making sure that's good. That's good. Okay. It's April 29th, 2025. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is GeekNights. Tonight we are talking about the acquisition of new gaming consoles. All right, go for it.
So for a long-ass time... Yeah, a long-ass time, I've had a hemorrhoid. And a hemorrhoid... I didn't even know what it was at first. And I had two doctors look, and they were like, they didn't even say the word hemorrhoid, those two doctors, right? And that was in like the late 2000s. I wasn't even living in the city, right? And so I realized on my own that they were hemorrhoids. And I'm like, oh, that's what hemorrhoids are. It was a word I knew, but I didn't know what it actually was. And it turns out like half of people have them.
Oh, they're so common. I knew about them because middle-aged relatives and acquaintances of my parents would talk about them and sciatica a lot when I was a little kid.
Yeah. It's apparently just a flaw of bipedalism, I guess.
Bipedalism is a land of contrasts.
But it's also a flaw in sitting too much, which we do. Sitting on the toilet too much. Smartphones, thank you. iPhone, I guess sue Apple. iPhone. Why is it around the time the iPhone came out? It's when I got the headphone. I should sue Apple.
Not for nothing, but there's a reason why I've used standing desks for many, many, many years. I get up like every hour and walk around.
And also, it's basically impossible, given the food situation, at least in most places on Earth, in most societies, to get enough fiber in your diet that you're supposed to get.
Yeah.
Right? And so hemorrhoids. And so I've had them for a long time, and it's just, they didn't hurt me. I would just sort of, if you don't want to listen, you should fast forward. But basically, I would poop and lumps would come out of my butt, and I'd shove them back in, and then I would be fine.
See, I only got a little tiny one that does not escape.
Yeah, it doesn't. If it doesn't escape, you're good, right? And just you shove it back in, and you're good to go. And then it would get worse and better over time, but it never hurt me or bothered me. And then until one time, it did hurt me, and I know that it was at least 5 years ago, maybe 2 times it hurt me at most. In all this time, since like 15 plus years, it only bothered me 1 or 2 times. And the newest preparation H that I had in the cabinet was expired in 2020, which means I must have bought it in 2018 or 2019. And so it's been that long since it's been a problem, until just Thursday, it became a problem.
I feel like that is the pattern with that thing, just based on the experiences with some of our other friends and other people I know who are about our age. They are a minor problem, and they will very suddenly become a major problem. And there's very little gradient between the two.
So I ran around to a bunch of doctors, a whole bunch of rigmarole with scheduling and all this kind of stuff and whatever. But regardless, the end story is that tomorrow, gonna go see the ass man. He's gonna chop up my butt, but sadly, I won't get a robo butt that I wanted. I'm just
the Archipelago is not quite available to us yet.
Yeah. The thing is, the one question I forgot to ask, right, is how soon will I be able to ride a bicycle after?
The most important thing, because we just went to the bike shop to get our annual bike work before bike season.
Myself, but we'll see when the bike season is going to start. It should start today.
Well, we go in, and the guy is a spokesman. The guy's like, "Oh my God, are you here because you need to do stuff on your bike for the 5-borough bike tour?" And we're like,
yep,
"No."
Which is Sunday.
So we're like, "No," and he literally is like, "Thank God." Okay, just give me a second.
Yeah, it's Sunday. That's why. If you don't know,
that thing was fun once, but I don't need to ever do it again. It's such a short ride.
It's amazing for people who are not already cyclists.
Oh yeah, because I was not a long distance cyclist at the time. So the first time I did it, like biking over that bridge to Staten Island just felt kind of amazing.
Yeah, people like 55 miles. Someone posted in the bike Reddit, like, can I do it? I can bike straight. And I'm like, children and old people do it. 55 miles looks like a scary number
Yeah.
when you've never biked, but it's like, if you keep pedaling and you don't stop, the ruthless efficiency of a bicycle, you will make it as long
Yup.
as you don't give up
Like for us,
or
any
have a heart attack.
ride, honestly, that's lower
It's
than
not a
about
race. You'll
like any
make it.
leisurely ride that's less than 60 miles feels like almost nothing. Like it ends way too soon, and we feel like, did we really even bike?
No.
Above
You didn't.
75, 80, then it feels like a real bike ride.
Anyway,
So anyway,
news.
in the news, so I play a lot of Overwatch, as you all know, because
Still playing it. How
yep,
about that?
it's a pretty good game. I like Overwatch a lot, but
Alright.
the funny thing is, no one's been able to really compete with it, but except the Marvel Overwatch, which is like such a nearly
Are people
direct
playing that?
copy.
It didn't
That game
die?
has a lot of players. Anecdata number one. All I'm gonna say, since Marvel Rivals launch, the community inside of Overwatch has been so starkly different in a positive way that it cannot be a coincidence. Good God, have I not reported anyone for being a piece of shit since Marvel Rivals launched? Not one person. Like,
Alright.
all the crappy people are over there playing Marvel, and they left us alone in Overwatch.
Okay.
But Overwatch has now introduced a new thing, which is common in games like MOBAs, but not really common in like FPSs and over team shooters, that kind
Well,
of
because
game.
those FPSs and team shooters don't really have classes and characters. You know.
Yep.
Right? So.
So Overwatch now has hero bands. And if you don't play MOBAs and you're not familiar with the concept, you can play all these different characters. And they all have radically different deals. Like, there's tanks that have big shields and hammers. There's tanks that literally fly around like a fighter jet. Like, you play all these different kinds of characters. But before every match now, both teams will privately vote in a ranked choice ballot which characters they want banned from this match. And the other team does the same thing. And then the ranked choice ballots of the two teams are merged, and 4 heroes get banned. Then you find out what map you're playing on,
So
and
no
then
matter
the
what,
competitive match
for
starts.
our band.
Yep, only 4 are banned.
Okay.
I don't super like it, partly just because I like it's a skill game. I like to engage with heavy competitive skill, and this is the kind of thing, as we were talking about before the show, that game companies tend to do when they can't balance a game for the audience they've got, and it's a clever way to add some balance and paper over the more fundamental issues. But while I say that lightly, it's almost impossible and might, in fact, be impossible to balance games like this. Like, the amount of effort it takes might not be feasible.
When you make it asymmetrical and you have too many characters or classes or whatever factions, you make a big problem for yourself.
Yep, Pareto Frontiers come in. We talked about all that before. So things I've noticed is that, one, this has actually, to a degree, solved one problem that happens in Overwatch, and I call it the turret character problem. You know, the kind of character in an FPS that throws out a little turret, and the turret sits there shooting on its own with auto aim. That kind of thing will destroy people who are bad at games and will not even touch people who are slightly good at games. So if you
if you make the auto turret, you could give the auto turret auto aim and high damage, in which case it would obliterate everyone regardless of skill. And then why would you have to choose that character with the turrets, basically, because it's so strong? And if you make it beatable, if there's any way to avoid the turret, defeat the turret, get around the turret, dodge the turret, skilled players will learn that way, practice it, get good at it, and be able to do it perfectly every single time, making the turret worthless because everyone who's good can defeat it. It's a binary situation. There's no situation where it's like, if you want to defeat the turret, you have to,
So
hurt.
Let's go all the way back. Mega Team Fortress in Quake 1, competitive play. There were turrets, and the meta was on the 2 fort maps. Both teams would have a turret in their flag room, and both teams had 1 or 2 people who were good enough to get past a turret. So that meant those were the only 2 people on either team who were even capable of getting close to the flag.
Yep, but the point is there is some skill bar, right, on can the turret be beaten, and basically only players above that bar can play seriously competitively.
Yep.
Right?
So right
otherwise, they just lose to turret, and turret is the dominant strategy. But if you have players above that skill level, turret is worthless, and that's it.
Yep. So right now, when I play tank, I am gold. Like, I am pretty good at tank. But when I play DPS right now, for a bunch of reasons, I'm down in silver. And I've noticed something. The silvers ban a certain set of characters extremely reliably. And the golds actually ban a different set of characters extremely reliably. So I talked to a friend of mine who plays platinum and up, who's really good. And they said it's kind of random what gets banned up there with the skilled players. It just cycles through almost everything, because at that level, every character is viable and everyone's really, really good at the game.
Usually at high skill levels, there's so few players that other players' tendencies, and that's usually what they're in MOBAs. Like, that's what you'll pick on, especially like esport, like tournaments. It's like, that guy mains, let's say fighting games, right? Let's say that guy mains Guile and Ryu. It's like you want to force him to play. He's better at Guile, or Ryu is a good counter to my character, so we'll force him into the Guile, or maybe we can ban Ryu and Guile and force him to play something he's not as good at, because no one can be good at every character. And it becomes something like that at the highest levels, where you have to know the people instead of just knowing the characters.
Yep.
But with randos online, you can't know the people. So.
And that's why what I'm most fascinated by is the blind ranked choice voting that they do for the bans.
That is a different method than I've seen MOBAs use. That's interesting.
Yep, like the UX of it is really good. I'm not going to belabor the point, but this is a topic I want to explore deeper in the future, or maybe as part of some panel down the road, because there's a lot to unpack that's way out of scope for doing a news. So you got any news?
Also, the other thing, one last thing about that feature is that it lets them collect data on which characters players believe are OP.
I'll tell you right now, shitty players ban Sombra, the person who's invisible and runs behind you and like kills you from behind and is like sneaky. They ban her 100% of the time. And in the higher meta, nobody bans her ever.
Yeah, they can take the Predator.
Yeah,
right.
I play her, so.
So in other news, right, there are these old Scrolls games, Elder Scrolls. You might have heard of these old Scrolls, and there are a number of games in this series. And in my opinion, the first two are kind of not so playable. Someone might argue with me. The third one, Morrowind, you may have heard of that, is kind of playable. Oblivion, the fourth one, is actually playable. I beat that whole game.
But the fourth one stood.
And then the fifth one is Skyrim, and then there's an online one, which whatever, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? And there isn't a sixth one. If there was, I would wait for it to be inexpensive and contain all the DLCs in one bundle and then play it, which is what I did for both 4 and 5. I didn't really play. I played 3 a bit, and 1 and 2 I couldn't get very far. Maybe I'll try again. I don't know. But anyway, they released HD, remaster, remake, new Unreal Engine, Oblivion edition, right? Because the current edition of that game, you could still play on your current PCs, but it is very dated. You could I'm sure you can still install the old version on Steam or whatever platform and play it.
I read a thing where they even said, like, some people from the company were talking about how younger gamers, just like in the anime world, like there's a lot of people who just won't watch an anime that looks old no matter how good it is.
Regardless of how it looks, it's just the quality of life features. It's like, Oblivion 4 is still playable, at least in my opinion, but compared to a Skyrim, it's got, some UI issues. It could be polished and spruced up, and that's what they did. And so if you've never played Oblivion and you want to spend a bunch of money, you can get the new version. And if you don't, then you can pay less money and play the old version if you're willing to deal with that. And there you go. But the thing what's interesting is that people sort of knew this was coming because of leaks, kind of. But what they did is they suddenly, on I think April 21st, they said, we're going to have an announcement tomorrow, and didn't say what the announcement was. And on April 22nd, they announced the game, and they said, it's out now.
That's what you always said companies should do. Like, Half-Life 3 should just appear one day in Steam. No fanfare, just, oh, hey, here.
Listen, people, if you develop a game and they announce the game and they say a release date and then they got to delay it or they got to make promises and then they don't fulfill the promises, it's like, if you just keep your fucking mouth shut
Yep.
until it's 100% done. No one is going to get on your case about delays like Duke Nukem Forever. Even if you have delays of 5 years, nobody will know except the
Yeah.
people who worked on it. And you just go, bam, here it is, release it. It's a big sensation. Everyone's going wild over it. It doesn't matter, right? You're marketing people with their hype train. You have to build up hype over time. You're wrong. Exhibit A, this thing is selling. It's hot, right? So it's not even a new game.
Yeah. All right. But anyway, things of the day. So my thing of the day is actually an answer to a question I received via email about a week ago from a listener. And the question was like, hey, you know, I really like your panels, whatever. But they were asking, when you're at a con, like, what panels do you go to? Like, what would
None.
you go see? Yeah, the answer is
the chicken panel.
yeah, I don't like most of the panel lecture content at fan conventions because it's very like I wouldn't go to our panels because I know the things that
Anime
are in our
hell.
panels.
Anime hell.
If I'm going to a panel, I don't care about industry announcements. I get those via press releases anyway. I don't care about celebrities. I basically want college lectures. So that chicken panel, which was like an ethnographic and sociological history of the presence of chickens in video games, like that's the shit that gets me going. And there's not a lot of content like that. If I was going to go to a panel like a GeekNights panel, it would have to be like 2 times deeper and more complex. It would have to be stuff that I don't understand. That's why I'm there. So what this is an example. This is sort of a panel lecture, but it's a university lecture. This is called Personal and Political, Playing and Designing for Transformation in Nordic Larp. It is a lecture from the Transformation Play Initiative event series. This is a university-driven event, but it's basically just like a panel, but this is the kind of thing I like. This is what I would go to. If this was in the schedule at a PAX, I would skip almost anything to go to this instead of whatever else was happening at the con.
Yeah, I think a good way to measure it is if the people in the panel are talking to the audience as if the audience are know-nothings, right, regarding the topic.
That's GeekNights. That's what we do.
Right, but then it's not a panel that I would want to attend. I want to attend a panel. Let's say it's about ice hockey, right?
Yeah.
I want to attend a panel where the people on stage, ice hockey coaches, players, talk to the audience with the same language and the same information level that they use to talk to each other, right?
Yep.
Talk about it at the deep level because that's what you cannot find. You cannot get that even if you watch hockey on television, right? You cannot get that level of. That's what makes it special at a con. The experts talk in the expert fashion.
Yep. So if you enjoy GeekNights content, then basically GeekNights content is broadly an extremely filtered version of the kind of content that we consume on the other side of that because we don't fully understand this stuff. Those are the people we're learning from. Also, this talk is fucking amazing, and it's part of some research I'm doing for a bunch of things, but I highly recommend watching this 1.5-hour video. It is worth your while.
All right. So in the world of video game, ROM hacks, randomizers, and all that, there's been this trend of making games such as, I think the first one that I saw was Super Metroid plus Link to the Past, right? Randomizer. And what it did is they took, because of the way the Super Nintendo works, they were able to combine Link to the Past and Super Metroid, the 2 best Super Nintendo games, and combine them into a single ROM. And there were certain parts of the game, useless parts like map rooms and rooms like that in Super Metroid, or houses that just had a guy to talk to in Link to the Past, where you'd go into and it would take you to the other game. And then they would take the items in the game and shuffle them up between both games. It's like you might be playing Super Metroid and you might find a sword. And then you're playing Link is going into a dungeon and he finds the power bombs or the high kick boots or something. And then you would try to beat both games to beat the game. And so this has been taken to a crazy degree. There's now like all kinds of nonsense.
I see Doom 2 in here.
Yes, the peak nonsense is now Archipelago. Archipelago lets you choose from a list of games, and it will create for you a randomized new game that combines all of the chosen games. So you can take Civilization 6, Lingo, and Rogue Legacy, and Slay the Spire, and combine them into a single game where you could get items for one game in another game. So I guess you'd be playing Undertale, and you find a Super Metroid weapon, And then in Super Metroid, you find an item, a key for Mario 64, and in Mario 64, you find a card for Slay the Spire. I don't know how the hell this thing works. I didn't actually try it.
Yep, I want to
But-
try it. I would say, you know how we talk about how the old internet was just better and it's the kind of thing that capitalism won't make? This is the kind of gaming experiences that gamers make that capitalism would not make on its own because the meta always becomes reality over time.
Mhm. Yeah, archipelago.gg. It's the multi-world randomizer generator.
I am going to try this out. I'm trying to think of the most ridiculous combo, especially because I see some games in here. But anyway, in the meta moment, so we're going to be live coming up real soon at PAX East 2025 with 2 brand new talks, game mechanics and tabletop design on Sunday, and the everlasting game on Friday. Otherwise, we're going to be hanging out, playing games. The book club book is Everything for Everyone, an oral history of the New York Commune. I expect in about a month and a half we'll probably do the show. Just that feels like a gut feeling based on how much free time I have and everything that's going on.
I just realized, since you just talked about Overwatch, that's your lifestyle game, and I neglected to include it in the panel because I forgot it existed.
That's
So,
fine.
you know, we got time to edit the panel.
Yep,
I
I got to go through my panel with you too because I have a bunch of Yahtzee math charts in it that I want to see if the story makes sense around. All right, so let's dive right into it because, as of course, Nintendo, you know, in my life, there have been many Nintendo consoles, and I have acquired.
Well, in your life, there have been every Nintendo console.
That true, but
There is no
acquired.
Nintendo console older than you.
But I
Maybe some
acquired.
Game & Watches?
Yeah, I got to look at the history of all those. But having gotten some consoles at launch and some consoles not at launch, like the act of getting a new game console remains, even in the year 2025, a sort of exciting generational moment. Like game consoles are
depends.
still a big deal. I think they're less of a generational moment now than they were in the past, as there's been a big convergence of technology and many games are released multi-platform and Steam exists. But you have to understand what it was like back when there was the Sega and the Nintendo, and then you'd find out that a new Sega was coming. So kind of want to explore this from the perspective of like the history.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a game console, right, that especially the ones that don't have expansion upgradable capabilities like PCs do, right? PCs, especially back in the day, PCs were improving rapidly, right? With Moore's Law was still being followed, not anymore. And so, you know, in the PC realm, things just kept getting better constantly. Whereas in the console realm, you saved a lot of money which is still the case, right? Compared to a PC because the console is just way cheaper, but the console only does one thing. And it's less powerful, but it doesn't seem less powerful because it's so specialized. So it gets, more regardless. You were stuck at this one level for a long period of time, right? Especially once we got past the cartridge era. The NES, the SNES to some extent could improve over their lifetimes by putting more chips in the cartridges. Other consoles, not really. And so when a new console came, it would also bring about new controllers, new capabilities, and not just, they tried to sell on the graphics, and they still do for a large extent, but it was like, not only are there going to be new games, there's going to be new kinds of games that never could have been and have never been, and now here they are.
Yep.
Right?
Like the jump between the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo was like generational and enormous.
And if you don't buy this new thing, it's really binary, right? It's like you either have this machine that can play these new games or you don't. And that's so if you get one, it's amazing. And that's going to be like the thing in your house that you use the most if you're a kid, or your most prized, most important possession for several years, or you won't have it.
Yep. My first console was the Atari 2600 because my every house, both grandparents' houses and our house and our aunt's house, every one of those houses had an Atari 2600 in it.
We had one, part of our life. I used it, but then it stopped working, and then it never got fixed. I don't know where it went.
We even when we got an NES, because I have this distinct memory, I wanted a Nintendo more than anything. But
I didn't find out. Well, I mean, once I found out about the Nintendo, I wanted it more than anything.
yeah,
But
well,
it
it
took a
wasn't. You know
while to
when
find
I
out about it.
the moment when I wanted it more than anything, and I was a little late to the party on the Nintendo because we were poor, like when I was young. So
I
we
just
had
didn't know about it until my cousin got one.
So I wanted a Nintendo, and my parents got us a 7800, partly because it was on sale at an outlet store for like nothing. So we played that 7800 to death. But one day when I was a little kid, I went over to my friend's house who had just gotten a Nintendo, so I could finally like really like see it. And he had Castlevania 2, which had just come out. And I saw him throw holy water, and it broke some bricks. And I remember getting into a fight with him because he wouldn't let me play because he was gonna play Thrill House style. And I was like, throw the holy water somewhere else, break those other bricks. And he didn't. He wouldn't tell me that only certain bricks break, and I didn't understand this. And we got into a big fight. It was really funny. But when I saw that game, it was so far beyond even what the 7800 could do that my little kid brains was just like blown away.
Yeah, it's like, even though, at the time I first saw an NES playing Super Mario Brothers at my cousin's house, right? I had never seen it or known about a Nintendo or Mario previously, but I had played Atari 2600, and I think I had seen an arcade machine or played one, even though I probably couldn't reach the buttons, right? But yet this looked to me at that brain age, right? It seemed like it was a new thing, even though I should have known what video games are, right? The gamepad was certainly new, right? I'd never seen a gamepad before, but it just seemed like it was like this revolutionary thing. Like it felt like I made no connection to the Atari or arcades, right? And then because the adults were like, all right, you played a few times and you played a few times, and okay, we're done with that. We're taking the TV back to watch football.
See, our family were such gamers that every one of the houses in our entire extended family had multiple TVs, and at least one
Did you
was.
say you were poor? We had one
Yeah,
TV per
yeah.
house
So
in
you know what?
at those times.
When my parents weren't watching something on the TV, we'd play the Atari on the good TV. But otherwise, the Atari was basically always plugged into the shitty black and white TV in the kitchen.
Yeah, we only had one TV per house in those days, and regardless, it was. I think the fact that it was like a limited, I couldn't just sit there and play it forever, increased the magicness of it.
I pretty much could just sit there and play it forever, and I kind of did.
I would have if someone let me, yeah, eventually.
But the thing is, so did my family. Like the adults, the kids, everyone. Like video games were a really deep part of my life and my family's life, and still are.
The adults only played a little bit.
Well, I mean, like my parents were really good at some of these games. But I remember we didn't get a Game Boy until way late to the party because we didn't get every console. But we got the Super Nintendo. It came out in '91 in like the summer, and we got it for Christmas that same year. That was like the biggest gift we'd ever gotten. And I want to, for any of you who are angry that the Nintendo Switch 2 costs like $400 and something dollars, the Nintendo Switch 2 cost almost exactly what the Super Nintendo actually cost at launch if you account for inflation. That was a $200 console. That's like $468 in today's dollars. And I remember our parents and grandparents collaborated, and for Christmas, we got the Super Nintendo, and it was in a box, and like 6 games, because there weren't that many like games out yet, and also the games were really expensive. And I think as little kids, we kind of lost our shit, and I think we played that Super Nintendo constantly, as much as our parents would let us, for years. But the Super Nintendo was when that was when I think I really started to get more discerning about games. Because like in the NES era, I would get any game I could. Like garage sale, someone selling a Nintendo game for $5 or less, I'll buy it no matter what. Like I didn't have any knowledge. But
yeah, I also had no knowledge. There were a lot of times I went and I would get a game, and the game would not be the best game, right? Because maybe I judged it based on the screenshots on the back of the box, or I judged it based on, I had seen it in a magazine or something, and I didn't really understand like what games were available, what kind of games they were.
The Super Nintendo.
All those games cost the same amount of money, and as a kid who wasn't spending the money but was just had only a limited number of game picks, like go to the store once, pick one game, my picks could have been spent more wisely had I had more information.
But the Super Nintendo was such a big leap forward that was where I started to recognize specific publishers that make good or bad games. I started to recognize like Kou Shibusawa because the Super Nintendo was capable of having games like Aerobiz, like numbers on a map games, and like much more complex, almost tabletop like experiences. And I'd get like that was a big part of my gaming life then. But also the Super Nintendo, like the controller was so good. Like to this day, that Super Nintendo controller is a really great format.
Well, they invented, the shoulder buttons.
Yep. All X and Y.
And they were the first persons to put 4 buttons in a box instead of the Genesis had the 3 buttons in a row.
Yep.
And so the 3 buttons in a row was kind of okay, but like it was really hard to say, for example, like, hold one button and hit another button, especially if it was like A and C. And then even I got the 6-button controller, which is vastly superior, but even then it was kind of not perfect. Whereas the Super Nintendo controller, it's like, yeah, you hold Y and then you press B to jump, right? And
but fast forwarding a little bit, like I think that magic in that was still there, even though we had good PC gaming, like we were playing Counter-Strike. When the GameCube launched, that was a pretty big event, but I think it's partly because it launched at the time when we were at college in a college apartment with a bunch of people who would play couch games, and the GameCube, more so than many consoles, was set up for 4-player couch games and had a lot of good games.
N64 was also. The N64 also had the 4 controllers. It was not a GameCube invention.
But I wasn't in college when the N64 came out.
You were not, but yeah, the thing with the GameCube though is that when the Smash Brothers was like it wasn't technically a launch title, but it came out like a week later or something, right? And that's what everyone was buying it for was because we had Smash Brothers 1, which was a sensation, and it was like, all right, here's the second one, everybody, and it's like, well, we're going all in on this because that was like the best fucking game ever.
Yeah, I skipped the N64 generation, partly because I got so deep into PC gaming at the time. But as a result, I remember when we were at RIT, you were all talking about Smash Brothers, and I had actually never played Smash Brothers before. So my first encounter with Smash Brothers was playing it on the GameCube.
Yeah, the N64 one is primitive by comparison, but still amazing in some ways. It was great, especially when we didn't even know the GameCube.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that, the N64, it was like the impression I had of it early on was sort of like, okay, this 3D stuff, but it's kind of weird and out there. And do I really, but it had legendary, you had your Ocarina of Time on there. And it's like, well, okay, can't argue with that. And that's really what it comes down to with the consoles, right? Is if you're going to buy a specialized hardware, it's for me, it's not about the power of that hardware, right? It's about, is there a game that thing does that nothing else does? Otherwise, why do I need it for?
Yep. Case in point, you want to play Dance Dance Revolution properly? You need a Dance Dance Revolution machine.
Yeah, it's like, does this device, right, if I'm going to buy it, is there something it does or some software it has that I can't be found elsewhere and is specialized in some way and that makes it worth buying? Because I must, if there's no such thing, that's why I wouldn't buy a PS5. Look at the list of exclusive games for PS5. There's almost none, and only a couple of them are like anything worth caring about, like the Astrobot one maybe.
Yep.
And it's like, I gotta pay all that money to play Astrobot, and it's like, well, if you're a person who does not have a PC at all and isn't going to get a gaming PC because they're expensive and you don't use a computer, you just live your life on your phone or your iPad, then a PlayStation 5 represents a good value because it's way cheaper and it has all these games that are on PC that you would have to pay way more to play on a PC, right? But if you have a PC, what is the use of a PlayStation? It's useless. It's like, okay, it's just a crappier thing of what I already have. And it's like, you can plug a computer into a television, but a Nintendo Switch, which is way less powerful, right, has all these games, right, that you can't possibly get anywhere else. I mean, there are people out there pirating and emulating Switch games and whatnot, but doesn't quite work because Nintendo's got their hooks in with, their various, controller mechanisms and things of that nature And it's like you kind of need an actual Switch, really.
Well, I think it's interesting because that sort of highlights the history of consoles was always sort of, for me at least, interwoven with a history of PC or like generic computing device gaming. In that, in the Atari era, like computer games were very primitive or weird. Or hard to play, and a lot of people didn't have access to them. So, like, the Atari was really the only way to play good games. Like, a lot of games on computers back then were fussy or bad. Like, especially when you got when you got to the Nintendo era, there weren't great platformers on the PC in the early days of the NES. Like a game that was responsive as Mario. Like Commander Keen was not actually that good. If you played Commander Keen, which was phenomenal for a PC platformer at the time, and you played a contemporary NES game, there's no comparison.
Right. Well, part of that isn't had to do with, when you get that old in terms of computing, it's because the old computers, the way their hardware was set up, the way their video cards worked, right, is you couldn't really do smooth scrolling, even if you had more megahertz and more memory and all these other things, just because of the way it worked. The audio could often be more advanced because, especially if you added in some sound cards, depending on the era, if sound cards existed yet. But the NES, despite being kind of weaker, sort of, the way it was architected was specifically designed to have things like sprites and scrolling that allowed it to achieve, these, video games that would have been much more difficult to program on the PCs of the time. And it wasn't until more like the 90s that, a Windows PC or, DOS could
in the Super Nintendo era, the SNES was still the best place to play games for me. And I played PC games, but the PC games I played were weird things that were better suited to mouse and keyboard. And it was I almost treated them as two completely separate worlds of gaming. But when the N64 came out, like I had Quake. Like PC gaming was getting to the point where it was mass market viable and exploding and starting to do the kinds of things that consoles really weren't capable of.
Right. Well, for the longest time, not just those internal hardware differences, but also things like the difficulty of plugging a computer into a television, getting a game controller to work on your computer, and having it be standardized and the game would support it properly with the correct nice button layouts, or using a keyboard or mouse on a console, or having it plug into a higher resolution display. It's like you couldn't have Civ 2 on the consoles of the time because the screens on your TV were not high resolution enough for a game like Civ 2. And so because of these differences that existed then, there, or handhelds, right, and their particular, eccentricities, certain kinds of games and certain kinds of software had needed specialized hardware, and there wasn't a sort of do-it-all solution. Now, any computing hardware, even the handheld, can play every kind of software, every kind of game. And so that's why you got the same game on the Switch. And, you've basically gotten rid of the differences even between handheld and, TV consoles, because it's the same thing now.
Like I can play Balatro on a Steam Deck, on my desktop, on a Switch, on my phone. It just kind of works anywhere.
Yeah. Every device, even, can have a gamepad or a keyboard or a mouse or a touchscreen and, or whatever. And they all have high resolution displays with full colors. It might be different shapes and sizes, but they're all mostly widescreen.
Yep.
And so every game can kind of be ported to every kind of thing. And that specialization doesn't exist. And so there is not as much of a push other than, making console exclusives as a publisher to sell your console.
Yep.
If I make a game, why would I limit it to one? That just seems like I'm throwing away money. And if I'm a gamer, why would I buy more than one? It's just two machines that play the same games. I just buy one machine.
Yep. And I feel like now, like someone who's very serious about gaming and specifically video gaming will probably have whatever the current Nintendo console is, and either a PC or a Steam Deck, I guess, or like a PS5 / whatever the current Xbox is.
You might have a PC and a Steam Deck just because you want some games you want to move around with.
True, I could see that. But like you don't need an Xbox and a PlayStation.
Yeah, it depends on, what games you're playing the most also, right? Some people don't really want to play a Zelda, but they want to play, games that are on Steam, and so they'll get a Steam Deck and not a Switch.
Yep.
Right?
What's interesting when I think back, I never like by the time the PlayStation 1 came out, honestly, the PlayStation 1 to me, the games looked like crap, partly because that's as PC gaming was really starting to explode. But at the same time, I did end up buying a PlayStation 1 solely to play Dance Dance Revolution because Stepmania didn't exist back then, and like there wasn't really any good way to play DDR except getting copies of actual DDR games, which really only ran on the PlayStation. But the PlayStation 2, like we all really wanted one, but we only wanted it because it was also a DVD player. There was like a couple games we were interested in.
Even if I look back at the PS2 library, I see there are some legendary games I've heard of, but a lot of them are like JRPGs or games that I don't really care
Yeah.
about. Even though it has just so many games, like I mean, there's people out there losing their minds over this, but I look at the PS2 library and I'm kind of like, eh.
Yeah. The
Even
only
now,
the only Nintendo console that not that I or non-Nintendo console that I actually like I had a Game Gear, but but like it served its purpose. But the Dreamcast still always stood out to me because I remember even in the year 1999 and 2000 when I was like 99% PC gaming. Like I was fully invested in PC gaming. That was my primary gaming avenue. The Dreamcast was the place where there were weird, cool experiences that weren't on PC or other consoles. The
yeah,
Dreamcast
but that
really,
shows you the kind of risk there was with consoles. Is like
yeah,
you could buy you buy one and then no games. The quantity wasn't there for Dreamcast, and so you could be sort of feel bad that you bought one,
yep.
right?
Game Gear
Um,
didn't have a ton of games before it petered out.
Yeah. I mean, okay, list of best PS2 games. Grand Theft Auto, meh.
Yeah,
Metal Gear, I'm not a Metal Gear fan.
yeah,
Shadow of the Colossus, I tried it and thought it was overrated. Resident Evil 4, I played it on GameCube.
yeah.
Grand Theft Auto again. Metal Gear again. Silent Hill, okay, that's famous, but it's not my deal. Final Fantasy X, okay, whatever. Okami, I played that on Wii, I think. God of War, I've heard talks about that. I could maybe be convinced to play
Mm.
one.
You know,
You
the
know,
Wii coming out also, that brought me like kind of back into consoles in that the Wii had accessories that were not really available on PCs and did a lot of brand new stuff that we had not seen before and did it
Mm,
well with those controllers.
mm. Yeah, but yeah, it'll be interesting, what the game consoles look like after the Switch 2, right? Going forward.
Yeah. Because Nintendo's really carved out its own world now, and everything else is basically just PC gaming with more or less fuss and flexibility.
and so I wonder, that's what Microsoft wanted to do with the original Xbox. It's just like, hey, let's make Windows you plug into your TV that's easy for people, and the same games will run on both. And they might be achieving that via SteamOS only decades later.
Yeah. Yeah, we will see indeed. I've off and on thought about getting a Steam Deck, but really I'd only need that if
I would, but I wouldn't use it.
yeah, well, I travel a lot for work, and increasingly, like, I don't want to buy another laptop just to run Steam with Windows when I'm traveling to have games to play. I could just bring like a Steam Deck with me, so I'm thinking about it, but it's not high on my list because I also have a Switch and will someday have a Switch too, and I will be using those when I travel, and they're fine.
Hmm. All right.
All right.
I
Stop
never
that.
pushed record.